Welcome to this week's episode of the People Success Circle podcast. I'm so excited to have my friend and fellow speaker, Samantha Lane, here today. Samantha is an expert in time management, and I am thrilled that she's going to share her expertise with all of my listeners today. So welcome, Samantha.
Thank you for having me, Mindy. I'm thrilled to get to talk to you.
Yeah, it's such an important part of the topic of this podcast. So, the topic of my podcast is really about how people can be successful at work. And that doesn't just lay on the shoulders of the company to make someone successful. Individuals have to make their decisions too on how to manage themselves and how they show up at work. And so, I do think your topic crosses over between what individuals can do for their own time management, but also what companies can do to support their employees too.
Absolutely. If you really think about it, time is one of the key things that we all share, regardless of our role in our industry. And it's
Mm.
something that touches us at work and at life.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It crosses over. And you probably know this, but well being is at an all time low in the world and in the US. And Gallup says that the well being percentage right now in 2025 is that 32% of employees in the US say that they're well. And so when you think about that, what do we think that impacts well-being? I mean, how we manage our time and how we're pulled in so many directions, I believe is one of the critical factors that impacts that score. So this is just such an important topic, and I'm so glad to dive in.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so I want to hear a little bit about your story. I know it, but I really want my listeners to hear about what prompted you to make that switch to become an expert in time management. And specifically, you talk about being a recovered workaholic. So I'd love to hear about why you call yourself that and what led you to where you are today.
Yeah, so I think I used to be part of that 32%. I was not well. I was not doing
Hmm.
life well at all. I was getting stuff done at work, but very much at the detriment of myself. And I was deferring so much of my life, just putting things aside that I didn't think I had time to do. And then in 2014, I had my chest cut open, and it was a planned surgery. The doctors identified me with a chest wall deformity, and they said, your sternum is sitting on your heart. And if we
Mm.
don't cut you open and fix it, you're at risk for heart defects. So they said, you'll be out of commission for 4 weeks and then you'll be good to go. So I agreed to be out of work to undergo this 5-hour surgery. But unfortunately, when I was supposed to be back at work, I was not cleared to drive. I
Mm.
eventually lost the ability to use my left arm, and I had a staph infection in my chest for months.
Mm.
And it was
My
a
gosh.
wild experience that I could not have planned for, but it
Yeah.
ended up being a real blessing in disguise because it just completely shook me loose and made me
Hmm.
realize, like, gosh, I'm managing my time wrong. I have this assumption that I have this
Yeah.
future, that my
Yeah.
time is infinite, but the reality is my time is finite. And I have no idea what's around the next curve. And I don't need to be taking a moment for granted. And so that was, changed my perspective so significantly, so quickly. And it set me on this path of committing to manage my time better so that I could be more present in my life.
I'm sorry that happened to you. It sounds so scary to have your chest, surgery done on your chest and that recovery. What were you doing before that work-wise? And then how did you make that pivot to saying, okay, no more? Like I can't take my life for granted anymore. Certainly a medical situation like that can help change someone's perspective. But what were you doing before? And then walk me through how you made that change.
Yeah. So I started out after college working in the creative industry. So I went to school for marketing and PR. So I was working for ad agencies, video production companies, very much in the creative industry, which anyone who's ever worked in the creative industry knows it's like the mecca for imbalance and
For sure.
workaholism. It's just too
Yes.
easy to be overwhelmed in that area. But I had made a pivot already. Like, I think I knew I didn't want that. And I'd already made a pivot, was working in higher education, helping
Mhm.
adult students go back to school to complete degrees, which, I
That's
had a
great.
real passion for. It was a good connection. I believe we all deserve second chances. And so that's one of the things that made it very easy for me to become a workaholic is it was a lifestyle position. So I wasn't necessarily 8 to 5. So a lot of people who work in sales or other similar roles, it's really easy for us to fall into this workaholism when we are not necessarily clocking in at 8 and clocking out at 5. So I was one of those casualties and I just cared about my work. And so it was very easy for me to do that. But when I had this epiphany, the first thing I realized was I needed to prioritize differently. I needed to know what was most important in my life, but also I needed to understand in the pile of to do lists at work what was actually important. And so that's why I sort of started with this realization of prioritizing. And then through that clarity of understanding what was actually important, I was conflicted again because my husband at the time was working as a firefighter. So I didn't really have this opportunity to not work at all. I
Right,
still had to
right.
perform at work. I still had to get up and go to work because I wanted to,
Mhm.
eat and have shelter. So
Yes, yes.
that sort of sent me down this realization of planning. And that's really what turned it into a time management focus and a time management business was this realization that once you know it's important, you've got to do something about it. And to me, that key was how do I allocate my finite precious time?
Mhm, mhm. And so did you stay in higher education for a
I
while?
did for, let's see, so my surgery was 2014 and I was in that same job until 2017.
Okay.
So I did stay until, and honestly, the only reason I left was I created these solutions for myself, and then people eventually said, "These solutions are great. You should turn this into a business," including my supervisor in higher ed. She was using one of my what became the cornerstone product of my business. And so everyone was really supportive when I said, "I think I'm going to stop working here. And I'm going to see if I can make this a thing because I think the world needs it." And they were all like, "Yeah, good for you. We're behind you. We can't wait to see what you do." And they have still been among to this day some of my most loving supporters.
That is amazing. So what are some of the things you put into place at the beginning to start managing your time differently? And really, I love that you said the word prioritization because I think that is a huge part of it, being able to plan and prioritize your time and your work and your projects. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I've kind of in all the things that I learned, I isolated it down to what I now teach as a three-part framework.
Hmm.
So there's sort of like this first part is prioritizing. So what I was doing right after that surgery was regularly checking with my boss and saying, these are my top three. Like, does this make sense? Is this still what's the most important? Or here's the number one thing I'm going to focus on from now until the end of the week. And just communicating what I thought was important with my supervisor and making
Hmm.
sure she was in agreement, like, yeah, that is actually what's most important, or actually those two are good, but that's are going to be swapped with this. So that was a huge thing of
Yeah.
just making sure my priorities were in order. Looking at my job description, looking at my performance metrics, looking at my goals, and just making sure that there was an alignment
Uh-huh.
between my calendar and what my organization expected from me. And this is something that I now teach to people because this is a very simple and effective tactic that we're just not doing a lot in the workplace. So then once I was doing that, the next thing that really became the absolute game changer was every Friday we had a team meeting.
Hmm.
And I took time right before that team meeting to map out a plan for
Hmm.
for what I was doing the following week to close loops and make sure that the week I was wrapping up was ideal. I did what I said I would do. I accomplished as many goals for I allocated when I would do them the following week. And that act of weekly planning is what ultimately changed my life and has become the
Hmm.
single most effective thing that I teach to people now. So those were some of the first really most important things. Like crystal clear on priorities, and then effective planning every single week.
Yeah, I love that because from an HR leader's perspective, those meetings can drastically increase the productivity of the team because they have that clarity. They know exactly what to work on. And so it makes everybody's job easier when there's not this ambiguity out there, right? When it's that clarity. So I love that you initiated that and went to your supervisor. And I think anyone can do that, whether their supervisor actually holds one on one meetings or not, but just doing that check in to say, these are what I think my priorities are. Am I on track or is there something you'd rather me focus on? Because ultimately, we're all aligned with working on the same thing in an organization to move something forward. We may have a different piece of that project, but we're all aligned to move something forward. Very few of us are individual contributors.
Absolutely. And I think what was really helpful for me was realizing that there's a huge difference between efficiency and effectiveness. And
Hmm.
a lot of how people perceive time management is efficiency. I have to do things faster. Okay, sure, that's helpful because we want to do things quickly with less waste. But the real key, I think, to making our time is doing things effectively, which to me is doing the right things with efficiency. And so that was a huge distinction that I had to make during my journey, was realizing I'm not just doing more to get more
Yeah,
done. I need to
right.
be working on the right things in a way that does not create stress for me.
So, Samantha, many people assume that being more productive means that you're actually working more. How do you help people shift that mindset from busyness to true balance?
So I do joke that I often have to retrain, because a lot of us have taken our entire lives to manage our time in the way we currently are managing it. And for people who are happy with their current time management, I don't want to touch that. But for people who are feeling like they're overwhelmed or they're stressed or they're not spending their time the way they want to, then this is
Hmm.
where we have to start sort of dissecting and breaking down past methods that may not be applicable anymore, past mindsets that may not be applicable anymore, and start replacing those things with more modern thoughts and habits as it pertains to time management. Because the reality is, everything we're doing has evolved. Our time management also needs to evolve. And so that's a whole deep well. But the short answer to that is to help people understand that. Again, I go back to these 3 Ps. If we start by knowing what's important, then we don't necessarily need to measure our impact in hours if our impact can be measured by something else that is
Yeah.
in fact a priority.
I love that. And, we live in a hyper connected world. There is no question that we are pulled in so many different directions. But when you have those priorities and they're really clear, it's easier to determine where your time should be spent for sure.
Absolutely. There's a million ways to, I think measuring time is really important. There's lots of ways you can measure impact, and time is
Hmm.
one of them. But at the same time, if the goal is to create a really impactful one sheet and it only takes you 30 minutes because you optimize all of your effective efficiency hacks, and then that shouldn't be diminished. You shouldn't feel like you have to run
Right.
out the clock if you
Yeah.
allocated more time. And I think that's something that I had to retrain myself, was the realization that I am not always measuring myself on hours. I'm often measuring myself on impact and on what I'm doing that's making my business successful. So helping other people to apply that in the workplace is important. But there's many ways to measure our success, and hours are not often one of them.
Love that. I love that. And as a business owner, I think sometimes I get stuck in that hamster wheel of like, if I just do more posting or if I just do more this, if I just do more that, but really focusing on the big buckets that give the most impact, I know is the most successful way to find balance, but also to find results, right? To get those results.
Absolutely, which is why I go back to, like, at the origin. Before we think about how we should allocate our time, we should understand why we're allocating our time.
Mhm. I love that. So you've said that you want people to be both present and productive. What are some simple practices that make it possible in a typical workday?
I think at the end of the day, I've observed over the years, I have observed my clients in many different ways. And because I changed my relationship with time management, I gained the ability to be present in my moments. I was no
Mm,
longer feeling that my body was in one place, but my thoughts were elsewhere. I learned how to be fully present in the moment that I'm in. And because of that, it gave me a better opportunity to observe and really connect
mhm,
with the things that were happening right in front of me. And through that, I identified some really powerful trends. So whether it is an hourly support employee or the CEO of a company, at the end of the day, a lot of people want the same thing. And that is to have a good day at work and make it home in time for dinner. And so I think those observations were really powerful, because alongside that, I realized the ones who actually reached that goal, who found that success, who performed the way they wanted to, it came down to a simple two-part formula, which became part of what I teach alongside that framework. And I think at the end of the day, success, whether it's in business, in the workplace, in sports, in anything you do, your success, it's a simple combination of mindset plus habits. And I think if you think about that formula, Mindy, mindset, what is going on between your ears? How are you thinking about things? How are you viewing things? Is your mind in a place that is healthy and working for you? And then
mhm,
here with that habit, then what is your body doing every day? What are your actions each day? And are those habits supporting that type of mindset, or are they taking away? And what I've learned too
mhm.
is, it's sort of basic algebra. Um, inside of that formula could be more off and it could be more adjusted. So a lot of people who come to me tend to be really powerful on habits, but they need some mindset adjustments because they're high achievers. And so we've got to sort of retrain this corporate PTS that some people have. But some people need more help on habits. They just need some basics of time management. But I guess I say all that to say that's really one of the most sort of impactful, broad sweeping understandings of time management is that at the end of the day, if you want to manage your time better, if you want to perform, it is a simple but not always easy formula of mindset.
I love that. And, it reminds me, early in my podcast, I interviewed a mindfulness coach, and she talked about how we've been trained to multitask, but true productivity comes from when we monotask. And it was so fascinating. Like in companies, oh my gosh, I was trained up by McDonald's Corporation, which is, I worked in the restaurants and then I worked in HR. And I mean, multitasking, clean as you go, don't go to the back without getting straws to replace them up front. I mean, like all the things, there were so many things that, so many ways we were taught to multitask. And now that concept of like, no, 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 don't multitask, like focus on the one thing you're doing right now. So like you said, your body and mind are aligned in the same place. And just that impact and that knowledge has already helped me to just be more productive.
I believe there are rare occasions in which you can find success multitasking. But the key is our brains are not wired to concentrate on two things at once. So if you're going to multitask, just make sure that if one of those is a concentration activity, that whatever you're pairing it with is not a heavy concentration activity. So a good example I like to give is podcasts. If we're going to listen to a podcast, I listen to podcasts all the time when I'm walking or running or driving, because depending on, especially driving a regular route, those tend to be things that don't require as much brain activity and concentration, and therefore you can concentrate with the on the podcast. But if you're doing something like reading your emails, that's not going to be successful to listen to a podcast. So I think you're exactly right, and I do think it's focus, it's concentration, it's I mention this often, but so much of time management is actually energy management and attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what do you mean by that? What do you mean by energy management?
So as humans, we work off of energy, and we probably feel this in our days regularly. We wake up, and for a lot of us, we feel a little more recharged just based off our circadian rhythm. So we have a peak performance time that is often tied with that circadian rhythm, and then most of us will have a trough where we are less energetic, and then some of us get lucky and we have a rebound where we get sort of a second wind, and then batteries tend to be fairly empty and we have to recharge again. So that's sort of the basics of human energy. But then there's also some things that impact that additionally, like introvert and extrovert tendencies. So a lot of people think introvert, extrovert means you're social or you're not, when in reality, that is how you lose or use energy. So I'm an extrovert, so stimulation is recharging for me. And when I perceive less stimulation, it's actually more draining for me. So the way
Mm,
that I tend to recharge my batteries, I did this just today. I like to dance at lunch, and that helps me to
I
recharge
love
my
that.
batteries. So while I'm making my sandwich or whatever I'm doing in the kitchen, I am almost always dancing at lunch. And it really just helps me to keep my energy high so
Yeah.
that I can maintain performance throughout the day. So another thing I tell people is, you wouldn't use your cell phone all day, every day without charging it, but we often do to ourselves if we're not peppering in those opportunities to maintain peak performance through our energy. And I know it probably sounds like such a periphery thing to time management. But again, this is just the approach that I've chosen to take is I think that the issue that I found after my surgery with time management, because I scoured the world. I tried every app, every hack, every planner. I went to Target like every day on my lunch break and I was like, there's got to be a way.
Yeah.
And what I realized was the issue is we were doing it wrong. And so the
Mhm.
approach that I try to take to time management is very different. But to me, Mindy, it's what I found to be most effective is we were taking
Yeah.
the wrong route.
Yeah. For sure. For sure. I've personally never found a planner that works. And so that's not I will say I do like your planner though. I do like your planner. I do weekly planning with your planner. For mostly for my family. But when I'm still kind of the digital person when it comes to my work appointments, I guess.
Well, and I think we live in a hybrid world, and so
We
I'm
do.
an advocate. I'm an advocate for paper planning, but I'm also not anti-tech. I think it comes down to how we use them, and this is why I have very
Mhm.
intentional steps for planning. And I encourage
Yeah.
people use paper first, then supplement with digital because it's really hard to live
Mhm.
in just one of those in this modern day.
It really is, and for me, like, my family calendar with teenagers and sports and music and all the things, that is, like, as full as my calendar sometimes, and so I do compartmentalize those, but I don't know for good or bad. I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but, I somewhat compartmentalize the family versus work.
I think it can work. And here's the beauty of time management. We're all unique snowflakes, and there's certainly broad things that we can all learn that will make us all better. And then there's areas where we must nuance and respect ourselves. So I'm going to give you a silly example. One of my best friends works out in the morning, and we tried to work out together. And I don't know how many times I would get up and I would try to work out in the morning, and it just like was awful. It was terrible. And it turns out I really like working out. I just don't like working out in the morning. So what would happen is I would set my alarm and I would hit snooze, 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 snooze. And then I would get myself up at the last possible minute to make it on time. And then I would have a miserable experience. And then eventually one day I was like, Samantha, you are who you are, and it's okay. And then I accepted my fate. I do not set my alarm for any time but the time I actually believe I can wake up. And
Yeah.
then I don't work out in the morning unless there is some very, very good reason. I simply build my schedule and my time around accepting the reality of who I am. And that might sound kind of silly, or even to some people, that might sound like a luxury. Because I know that there are certainly days and seasons of life where we don't get to fully respect our personal preferences and needs. But what might sound adjacent to time management, but it's actually very connected, is we need to understand who we really are and how we really
Yeah.
succeed and really just start embracing that because that helps
Mhm.
us. We're not fighting so much friction and we're able to get things done in a way that is more powerful. Again, it goes back to that
Mhm.
energy management. We're not
Yeah.
fighting ourselves.
Right. And it also relates to what you were talking about prioritization, right? Like we can't do everything in a day, personally or professionally or with our family. Like there's no I mean, some days work like clockwork, but most days for me have like something I have to like pause on or something I get to do more of, you know? And so I love how you've said several times that there is no one size fits all for time management. Every single person is different, and so while there are great systems and processes, and certainly tested systems and processes out there, people have to make this a personal thing to determine what's best for them.
They absolutely do. So remember I mentioned I used to be a workaholic train wreck and then I started managing my time better. And there was a day I remember so clearly. I'd come into work a little bit early. All my items for the day were accomplished. So I felt extremely justified leaving 10 minutes early. And I remember I was going to go to my nephew's cross country meet. He had a cross country meet right across the street from my office. So 10 minutes before I was supposed to walk out the door, my boss comes in and she says, "Hey, we've had a walk in. Can you handle that?" And I froze. And then I heard a voice. It was like my body became possessed and a voice just said no. And she was like, "Okay, cool. I'll have Jacob do it. Bye." And I was like, "Wait a minute. Were I to say no?" And that's when I realized sort of this third piece of what became the life changing key for me in time management is know what's important, make a plan to achieve those things, and then protect that plan. So
Mm,
often we react and we say yes to
yeah.
things that we don't want to say yes to or that we feel like we have to and we change our plan. And to your point, like your day may start a certain way, but it may end a different way. And that's totally normal. And this is why I believe God made erasers because plans are definitely going to change. I think what's important is that we decide as with as much control as we can when and what we allow to change, but that we default to protecting those plans because we said this is important. We said this is a strategic way to accomplish it. Let's try to see the plan through as much as we can and then be willing to change when we know that that's really the best option.
Yeah, and, you sounded like you had a little surprise in your voice when your boss said, "Okay." And so sometimes we just assume that if our boss is asking us for something, we have to say yes, right? And it's okay to have a discussion to discuss options and, instead of like just totally pivoting your own personal schedule, at least sharing what that is with your supervisor so that they can help make it the best decision. They may say, you know what, for this time, could you please stay? And then you also might say no. Saying no is okay. And so I mean, it really is a complete sentence. I've seen that more and more lately. No is a complete sentence. And, relationships are important too. So I think I'm not telling everyone to just say no to their boss all the time. That's definitely not the message I'm sending. But when you think about protecting the plan that you have made for your work and your personal life, it's just so wise because it really takes that ownership of us as individuals to say, this piece I need to protect. And that's important to me.
I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, talking to your boss, like that perception. Like I think sometimes we have this perceived sense that we can't say no. We have this like false
Oh,
belief.
for sure. For
And if we just
sure.
have the conversation, I see this all the time, 9 times out of 10, you end up having a conversation with your supervisor. You're like, cool, no big deal, have fun. Like, it sometimes we just like get in our heads and we think, especially high achievers, especially people who are really committed to the results of the work. We don't feel like we are the ones who are not allowing ourselves to say no, when in reality, we need to say no because we need to recharge our batteries. We need to continue to be able to be an asset instead of slipping into a state of liability because we've not been doing what we truly know we need to do.
Yeah, and we tend to think that when a supervisor asks us to stay or to take on something that we're the only option, right? Whereas most supervisors have other ideas too. They're just asking us first. And so giving them the information to let them use another option to solve it just makes sense.
And there may not actually be a sense of urgency.
Yeah.
We may have fabricated it.
Yeah, for sure. Because when your boss asks you something, you naturally want to say yes. You want to please. And so, just that, the benefit of that conversation can change the whole situation and it can be a win win for the boss and the employee. So, let's talk about organizations. We've talked a lot about the individual, and I would love to talk to you about some of the common pitfalls that you see in the organizations that you consult regarding time management. And so, let's start with what the pitfalls are, and then let's move into some advice for them.
So there are many different things, and I wish that my answer were not different. But the reality is, across every organization, all the various demographics I see, the most frequent pitfalls are the same three things.
Okay, what are they?
Number one, there is not broad, cohesive clarity on what is actually important.
I just talked about this with a client the other day. I'm like, they have to know what's important from the top and it has to be cascaded to the department, and then to the employee because cascading those goals gives the prioritization that people need, right?
There's not a unified rally cry that everyone can get behind. It's confusing. Different departments have different rally cries.
Right. Right. And so those cascading from organizational goals to department goals to individual goals can change the whole trajectory of everyone's performance because we're all aligned, right? So I'm not surprised from an HR perspective. I'm not surprised that that's one of the most common pitfalls. So
So,
what's number two?
okay, so number two is we are not planning far enough in advance.
Mm, yes.
So we are in too much of a reactive mode. And
Hmm.
so we're not looking 24 hours in advance, let alone 168 hours in advance, which is what we
Yeah.
should be doing, which is the amount of hours we have in a week. So
Hmm.
not looking far enough down the road, thinking with a micro lens instead of a macro long term lens. So that's probably
Hmm.
number two.
Okay, I will say that I'm guilty of that sometimes with my own team, and I know it. Like, I know that that is the case, and so I have, like, a 12-week plan that's very clear, and everyone on my team knows it, but sometimes those things, creep in, and so, I can see that pitfall, like I said, sometimes with myself too. Alright, what's number 3?
Number three is we have too many things that would qualify as urgent and not important on the Eisenhower urgency matrix. And so we're very distracted by things that are in our face but don't necessarily have significance for the organization.
Yeah. So for someone who might not be familiar with the Eisenhower matrix. Can you give us just a high level overview?
Yes, long story short, it is two axes that make up four quadrants. So you have quadrants one, two, three, and four. And each of those quadrants is a way to, for me, evaluate the demands for your time based off urgency and importance. So quadrant one,
Mhm.
items that are both urgent and important. Quadrant
Mhm.
two, items that are important but not yet urgent. Quadrant three, items that are urgent but not necessarily important. And quadrant four, items that are not urgent and they're not important. Now, there are not hard or fast rules for this. I'm not here to say what is important and what isn't important. It's more a tool that can help people reflect on their own personal demands for their time in a moment of.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, that's a great overview. So if someone's listening today and they are feeling overwhelmed and they don't even know where to start with, reducing their burnout and getting that balance in their life, what are a few first steps that you would recommend they take on a personal level?
Well, I mean, I could use many steps, but there's only one that really matters. At the end of the
Mhm.
day, if people ignore everything else that we've talked about today, and I hope they don't, but the single most important step is to do weekly planning. To take time every week. I like Fridays and
Mhm.
wrap up the week you're currently in and map out a game plan for the following week. That alone is life changing. Even if you, and I like to do it on paper and I advocate for paper with that sort of digital reinforcement. But even if people plan 100% on a digital calendar, even if they make their plan and then they lose their plan, the act of taking time to sort of calibrate for the week and get set, that is life changing.
It really is, and I've started, like, really collaborating that with my husband. We do it on Sunday for the family, and then I actually do it on Sunday for my work week as well, but that the weeks that we collaborate and we have a plan, they run so much smoother. Everything's so much smoother, but the weeks that we're, like, running around like chickens with our head cut off, it definitely we can definitely tell.
That weekly planning is that's the number one most important thing.
Okay, so now if we have somebody listening who is a manager of people or a leader in an organization or a business, and they're sitting here listening to this going, okay, I would actually like to make some changes so that my employees feel that they can manage their time better. Where would they start? Or what's one or two small things that they could do to start leading a team or an organization in a way that encourages that time management balance?
I would encourage them to implement the framework in their days. So
Mm-hmm.
prioritize, plan, protect. So what
Okay.
that could mean is making sure your team is unified on what the priorities are,
Mm-hmm.
creating a culture that values regular proactive planning,
Mm-hmm.
and also having discussions around appropriate ways to protect plans. Making sure
Okay.
that everyone's on the same page, common language, common expectation. So if
Mm-hmm.
I were a supervisor, I would take my team, I would first sit down and figure out how do I want to roll out the three P's to my team? What are sort of the clarity I have on how to prioritize, what are the priorities, how are we planning, how are we protecting? And then I would communicate that in a meeting to my team and make sure we are all very clear on this is what the three P's look like for us for a period of time.
So, Samantha, thank you so much for your time and sharing your wisdom with us today.
Thank you for having me.
If this episode resonated with you in any way, please leave a 5-star review and, more importantly, share it with a friend or a coworker who could benefit from this important information. I look forward to seeing you on next week's podcast. And until then, have a great week.